Scotland has a problem it rarely admits out loud. Behind the stone walls of its most overcrowded prisons, a quiet crisis has been building for years. Men and women cycle in and out of the same cells, the same corridors, the same despair. The system processes them. It rarely transforms them. But somewhere inside HMP Barlinade, Glasgow's aging, straining, legendary jail, something different is happening. A man named John is learning to read a road. Not metaphorically. Literally. Traffic cones, warning signs, temporary signals. He is 44 years old, and this may be the first time in his adult life the system has handed him something useful. Before we go further, if stories like this one matter to you, consider subscribing. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Every view tells the system that these stories deserve to be told. Scotland's prison population recently hit an all-time high. 8,587 people were being held in a system built for 7,805. That is not a statistic. That is a pressure cooker. Emergency early releases had already pushed over 600 convicted individuals back onto the streets in the preceding 6 months. The walls were full. The beds were full. The question no one was answering loudly enough was simple. What happens when they come home? The revolving door is not a metaphor invented by journalists. It is what the men inside Barlinade call it themselves. You leave. You struggle. You return. The door swings again. For decades, the debate around Scottish criminal justice has circled the same tired axis: punishment versus rehabilitation, consequence versus opportunity. The prisons have largely been built around punishment. The evidence, quietly, has always pointed somewhere else. John Gilchrist does not look like a documentary subject. He looks like someone's uncle, someone's neighbor, someone who made choices and is now trying to make their consequences. When he speaks about the training program, there is no performance in it. It's not just about the skills, he said. It's about the confidence to be able to go and achieve something. Those words carry more weight than they first appeared to. Confidence is not a skill they teach in prisons. It is not on the curriculum. It is not in the budget. And yet here it is, arriving quietly in the form of traffic cones. The scheme is called Unlocking Future Connections. It is a partnership between the Scottish Prison Service and Amey, a road maintenance company that recognized something unusual: the labor shortage, meeting a population of undertrained, underestimated people. The roads sector in Scotland is aging out. The workforce that built and maintained the network is retiring. New recruits are not coming fast enough. The qualifications are specific. The work isn't glamorous. And the pipeline has quietly been drying up. Someone, somewhere, made a connection that should have been obvious years earlier. The training itself is methodical, almost deceptively ordinary. Inmates follow a written plan. They lay cones in sequence. They position warning signs. They operate temporary signals as part of a coordinated team effort. They are assessed. They are corrected. They are trusted with a task and expected to complete it. For many of them, that trust is not a small thing. It may be the first professional trust they have been extended in years. At the time of filming, two former inmates had already secured full-time employment after completing the program. 2 out of a prison population of nearly 9,000. That number could be read as encouraging. It could also be read as a beginning: fragile, underfunded, and quietly revolutionary. John Gilchrist is due for release early next year. He speaks about his future with a careful kind of hope, not the wide-eyed optimism of someone who has never been disappointed. Something more cautious than that. My hope for the future is to move on to the next part of my life. Pauses. Rather than just being a revolving door and coming back to prison. The fluorescent light above him hums. The door, for now, remains open. The roads of Scotland do not build themselves. Someone has to close the lane. Someone has to set the signs. Someone has to stand in the cold and make sure no one gets hurt. For decades, that someone has been getting harder to find. Katie Bold has spent years inside the infrastructure industry watching a quiet emergency unfold. She is Amey's senior social value manager, and her language is precise, careful, and practical. It is difficult to recruit, she said, without drama. People have to be competent and have the correct and qualified tickets in order to apply for those positions. The word tickets is industry, language, certifications, licenses. Proof of competence that takes time and money and access to obtain. Most people cycling through the justice system have none of those things. That is not an accident. It is a structural gap that has simply never been addressed. The roads and construction sector in Scotland is facing what economists quietly call a demographic cliff. The experienced workforce is aging. Retirements are accelerating. The knowledge and the qualifications are walking out the door with them. Young workers are not replacing them at the required rate. The industry is not glamorous. It is physically demanding, weather exposed, and technically specific. It requires patience, precision, and the ability to follow complex safety protocols under pressure. These are not simple skills, but they are learnable skills. Amey's realization was not purely altruistic. Labor shortages cost money, and filled positions delay projects. Infrastructure budgets bleed when qualified workers cannot be found in sufficient numbers. The business case and the social case arrived at the same door simultaneously. Inside the prisons, there was an untapped population of people with time, with motivation, and with almost nothing to lose. The question was whether the institutions could be made to speak to each other. Lindsay Weston works on the inside of that question every day. She is the Scottish Prison Services Learning Skills and Employability Manager, a title that sounds administrative but carries enormous practical weight. Our belief is unambiguous. If we can invest in them whilst they are in custody and make that time purposeful, she said, it will hopefully make them better citizens when they go out into the community. The word purposeful is doing a great deal of work in that sentence, because purposeless time, and Scottish prisons have historically had a great deal of it, does not rehabilitate anyone. It warehouses them. It waits. It returns them and changed or worse. The Unlocking Future Connections program was not born fully formed. It was piloted first at HMP Inverness, a smaller facility in the north of Scotland, where the variables could be controlled, the results tracked, and the failures absorbed before scaling wider. The pilot held. The results, while modest in number, were directionally significant. 2 inmates gained full-time employment. Others gained qualifications they had never previously held. The program was then expanded to 15 prisons across Scotland, a network of institutions stretching from the Central Belt to the Highlands. Speedy hired Haddon Traffic Management, and Breeden joined the partnership alongside Amey. Private sector companies, investing in a public sector problem they had a direct interest in solving. But here is the tension that the official announcements do not fully address. Scotland's prisons are not functioning at capacity. They are functioning beyond it. 8,587 people inside a system designed for 7,805. That is not an overcrowding statistic. That is a system and structural failure. When a prison is overcrowded, education programs compete for spaced out. Training competes with security logistics. Rehabilitation competes with the daily grinding mechanics of simply managing a population that the infrastructure was not built to hold. The ambition of unlocking future connections is real, but the environment it is operating inside is fractured in ways that one training program cannot fix alone. John Gilchrist knows this better than any policy document can capture. Has been inside the system long enough to understand its rhythms, its limitations, its small cruelties, and its occasional, unexpected kindnesses. When he talks about hope, he is not speaking abstractly. He is speaking about the specific, practical hope of a man who has run out of time to wait for the system to change. It's hope that there is a different life out there for you. He said, not guaranteed, not promised, just possible. In a system this stretched, possibility is not nothing. It may, in fact, be everything. The cones go down, the signs go up, the temporary signals blink amber. In a training room inside Barliney, men learn to make the road safe for strangers. They do not yet know if the road will be safe for them. There is a number that Scottish justice officials do not like to say out loud in the same sentence as the word success. The reoffending rate. It sits, persistent and damning, at the center of every conversation about what prisons are actually for. In Scotland, nearly 60% of people released from short-term sentences return to custody within 2 years. That figure has not meaningfully improved in over a decade. Programs come and go. Budgets are announced and quietly absorbed. Ministers make speeches at podiums. The door keeps revolving. Justice Secretary Neil Gray chose his words carefully when speaking about unlocking future connections by giving people in custody the tools they need to build a better future. He said, "We can help break the cycle of reoffending and support safer communities." It is a sentence constructed to be quoted, measured, optimistic, politically clean. What it does not say is louder than what it does. It does not say why it took this long. It does not say how many men rotated through Barlini in the years before this program existed and found nothing waiting for them but a bus pass and a discharge letter. It does not say what happens to the inmates who complete the training and still cannot find work. What happens when the qualification is real but the opportunity does not appear. Katie Bald acknowledged the practical reality with admirable directness. The industry has a skills gap, she said. The workforce is aging. The qualifications are specific and costly to obtain through conventional routes. The program exists, in part, because the roads sector cannot afford to keep ignoring the people it has been ignoring. That is not cynicism. That is economics meeting conscience at an intersection that has been managed for too long. But there are questions the official narrative around this scheme does not comfortably answer. 2 inmates secured employment after the pilot at HMP Inverness. The scheme is now expanding to 15 prisons across Scotland, serving a population of nearly 9,000 people. The mathematics of that ambition against those early numbers deserves examination, not to diminish what 2 employment outcomes represent for 2 human lives, but to ask honestly, what does success look like at scale? The Scottish Prison Service insists the intent is genuine. Lindsay Weston speaks about investment, about purposeful time, about building better citizens. The language is sincere. The institutional will appears real. And yet the prisons remain overcrowded. The emergency early releases continue. The structural pressure on rehabilitation programs does not ease. A training course, however well designed, does not exist in a vacuum. It exists inside a system that is, by its own admission, beyond design capacity. John Gilchrist does not speak in policy language. He speaks in the language of a man counting down days. His release is approaching. The training is behind him. The qualification sits, new and unused, waiting to mean something outside these walls. He has spoken about confidence, about hope, about not wanting to come back. What he has not spoken about, because no one has asked him directly, is what he will do if the door closes, if the application goes unanswered, if the interview does not come, if the qualification proves not to be enough in a market that still sees a prison record before it sees a person. That silencer on the hardest question is not unique to John. It is structural. It is systemic. It is the gap between what a program promises and what the world outside actually delivers. Former inmates in Scotland face barriers to employment that a traffic management certificate alone cannot dissolve. Criminal record disclosure requirements, employer hesitation, housing instability, the psychological weight of reintegration into a society that moved on while they were held in place. The road skills are real. The need in the industry is real. But the distance between a training room in Barlini and a full-time contract on a Scottish road remains vast and poorly mapped out. And then there is a detail in the reporting that lingers. And comfortably, over 600 inmates were released early in the preceding 6 months, an emergency measure responding to a system at breaking point. Early release without employment, without housing certainty, without the structured transition that programs like this one are designed to provide. 600 people pushed back into communities that were not prepared to receive them. How many of them had been mid-program when the doors opened? How many walked out before the qualification was complete? Nobody has answered that question publicly. Nobody appears to have been asked. John is still inside. His release date is still ahead of him. He still has time to finish, time to qualify, time to stand in the training room and place the final cone in the correct position. But the question that nobody wants to sit with is this: what was built for him on the other side of the gate? Not in the speeches, not in the press releases. In the actual world, on the actual roads, where the actual work either exists or it does not. If this documentary is making you think, share it. pass it on. The stories inside these walls deserve more than official silence. Subscribe, because Chapter 4 is where the answers start to get uncomfortable. Every prison has an unofficial economy of hope. It runs parallel to the official one, the programs, the assessments, the discharge plans filed in triplicate. The unofficial economy is simpler. It runs on rumor, on precedent, on the quiet word passed between men who have been through the system more than once, the word on unlocking future connections. Among inmates who knew about it, was cautiously positive, not euphoric, not evangelical, cautiously positive. That distinction matters enormously inside a place where cynicism is a survival mechanism and false hope is considered more dangerous than no hope at all. Men who have been failed by programs before do not trust easily. They have sat through workshops that led nowhere, attended courses that evaporated on release, held certificates that employers refuse to recognize or simply refuse to see past. The wall between qualification and employment is not theoretical for them. They have run into it at full speed. In job interviews, on application forms, in the moment a hiring manager's expression shifts upon reading a disclosure form. Katie Bald's ambition for the program is to achieve what she calls retained employment, not a placement, not a trial, not a goodwill gesture from a socially conscious contractor. Retained employment, a job that lasts, a role that becomes a career. A person who does not return. That word retained is doing more work than it appears to. Retention requires more than a certificate. It requires an employer willing to invest, a workplace culture that does not isolate, a support structure that continues after the gate closes behind the former inmate for the last time. None of that infrastructure is guaranteed by the program as currently described. The training is real. The qualifications are industry recognized. The partnerships with Speedy Hire, Hatton Traffic Management, and Breeden are genuine expressions of private sector commitment. But the connective tissue between release and retention, the mentorship, the follow-up, the human architecture of successful reintegration remains largely unspecified in the public account of the scheme. This is not an accusation. It is an observation. Programs frequently excel at the visible parts, the training room, the certificate, the press announcement. The invisible parts are harder to fund, harder to measure, and harder to sustain. LYNSEY. Weston understands this terrain better than most. Her work inside the Scottish Prison Service sits at the intersection of aspiration and operational reality. She speaks about making time in custody purposeful, about access to greater opportunities, about building better citizens. These are not empty phrases in her mouth. They carry the weight of someone who has watched the system succeed occasionally and fail frequently. But even she cannot fully control what happens when the gate opens. The SPS can train. It cannot hire. It can prepare. It cannot guarantee. The 15 prisons now carrying the program represent a significant institutional commitment, from HMP Inverness in the north to HMP Barlinnie in Glasgow. The geography of the scheme maps almost exactly onto the geography of Scottish poverty and structural unemployment. These are not coincidental locations. The prisons are where they are because of where deprivation concentrates. The inmates inside them come disproportionately from communities where the labor market was already thin before criminal record entered the picture. And here the structural irony tightens. The roads and infrastructure sector needs workers in the same communities where former inmates are most likely to return upon release. The labor shortage is not abstract. It is local, specific, and growing. If the pipeline from prison training to community employment can be made to function reliably, the geographic alignment is almost perfect. The men trained in Glasgow's prison would return to Glasgow's streets, and Glasgow's streets need maintaining. But pipelines require pressure to function. They require consistent investment, consistent monitoring, consistent accountability. The expansion to 15 prisons is encouraging. The public statements from Justice Secretary Neil Gray are encouraging. Encouragement, however, is not a workforce development strategy. It is the announcement before the strategy. The ribbon cutting before the road is actually built. There is a detail about John Gilchrist that sits quietly in the account of this program. He is 44 years old. He is due for release early next year. 40-4 is not old, but in a physical industry with demanding outdoor conditions, It is not the profile that most recruiters instinctively reach for. The youth pipeline into roads and construction has always been assumed to begin much earlier, apprenticeships at 18, site labor roles at 20, qualification builds across a decade. John is beginning that sequence at an age when others have already been in the industry for 20 years. That is not disqualifying. The industry's own representatives have made clear that competence and certification matter more than age. But the pathway for a 44-year-old former inmate entering a physical outdoor industry for the first time is narrower than the optimistic framing of the program suggests. It demands more from the employer, more patience, more investment in onboarding someone who is new not just to the role but to the professional world itself. The question of whether that investment will be forthcoming consistently, at scale, across 15 prison sites is one that the program has not yet had long enough to answer. The cones are still arranged on the training room floor. The assessment is still underway. The instructor is still watching. Outside the walls, the roads are waiting. Whether they are waiting specifically for these men is a question the program has promised to answer. The answer is still being written. There is a moment in every rehabilitation story that the official narrative skips over. It happens after the certificate is issued, after the handshake, after the press photographer has packed up and left. It happens in the weeks that follow, in the silence between release and whatever comes next. That silence is where most rehabilitation programs live or die. Not in the training room, not in the ministerial statement, not in the carefully worded partnership announcement. In the silence, in the gap, in the unanswered phone call and an open email and the application form that disappears into a database somewhere and is never discussed again. The Scottish Prison Service has been here before. Programs have been launched with genuine intent and genuine funding and genuine public support. Some have endured, many have not. The ones that failed did not usually fail because the training was poor or the instructors uncommitted. They failed because the world outside the gate did not hold its shape long enough to receive the people being prepared for it. Employment support for former offenders in Scotland exists on a spectrum. At one end, there are organizations doing extraordinary work with minimal resources, charities, social enterprises, community projects that absorb the human cost of reintegration with patience and consistency. At the other end, there is a labor market that legally requires disclosure of criminal convictions for a significant range of roles, and that informally discriminates well beyond legal requirements. And locking future connections is operating somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. It has the backing of real employers with real vacancies. That is not insignificant, but it is entering a landscape that has defeated better resourced attempts before it. Katie Bald's phrase, retained employment, keeps returning. It is the right ambition. It may also be the most difficult thing to actually deliver. Research into employment outcomes for former prisoners consistently identifies the same pattern. Initial placement rates can look encouraging. 30, 60, 90 days after release, the numbers hold. Then attrition begins. The pressures accumulate. The support structures, where they existed, start to thin. By 12 months, the picture is frequently much less hopeful than the early data suggested. The road sector has particular characteristics that make retention both more and less achievable than average. More achievable because the work is physically absorbing, team-based, and structured. Those characteristics are known to support stability in people navigating the psychological complexity of reintegration. Less achievable because the work is seasonal, contract-dependent, and geographically mobile. A former inmate without a driving license, without stable housing, without a family car, cannot easily follow a road maintenance contract from Glasgow to Inverness when the local work dries up. Mobility is built into the industry's DNA. It has not historically been built into rehabilitation planning. There is a person who does not appear by name in the official account of unlocking future connections. They are the former participant who completed the program and did not find work, who held the certificate and sent the applications and attended the interviews and was not selected. Who returned to the community without the employment the program had prepared them to hope for. That person exists. Statistically, given any program of this kind, they exist in meaningful numbers. Their story is not told in press releases. It does not appear in ministerial speeches. It appears, eventually, in reoffending data, in custody records, in the quiet internal accounting of a system that measures failure differently from how it measures success. John Gilchrist has said that he does not want to be a revolving door. That phrase, his phrase, not a policy document's phrase, contains a lifetime of understanding about how the system works and what it costs to be caught inside it. He has watched the door long enough to know its rhythm. He knows that wanting out is necessary but not sufficient. He knows that a certificate is an argument, not a guarantee. What he may not yet fully know, what the program itself may not yet fully know, is how the argument will be received on the other side. The expansion to 15 prisons will generate more participants, more assessments, more certificates. It will generate data. Outcomes will be tracked, at least for a period. The Scottish Prison Service and Amey will both have institutional reasons to report that data favorably. That is not corruption. That is the normal gravitational pull of organizational self-interest in any public-private partnership. The independent evaluation of this program, rigorous, longitudinal, and sentimental, has not yet been announced. Perhaps it will be. Perhaps the results will be published in full, including the outcomes for participants who did not succeed. Perhaps. What is not in doubt is the human reality inside Barliney's training room. Men learning a skill they did not previously have. Men being assessed against a standard that does not adjust for their history. Men being asked to perform competence in a system that has spent years processing their incompetence. There is something quietly radical about that. Not radical in a political sense. Radical in the original sense of going to the root of something. The root of reoffending is rarely evil. It is usually desperation, disconnection, and the absence of a viable alternative. The program is attempting to plant something at that root. Whether it grows depends on conditions that extend far beyond a training room in Glasgow. Outside, the Scottish autumn is settling in. The roads are wet. The light is failing earlier each day. Somewhere on a motorway near Glasgow, a traffic management crew is setting up for a night shift. High dash visibility jackets, amber signals, cones placed with precision in the dark. One of the figures, if you look carefully, might be someone who learned to do this inside a prison, or might not. That uncertainty is the whole story. John Gilchrist's release date is approaching. Somewhere between the writing of this story and the watching of it, he will have walked through a gate. He will have stood on a Glasgow street with a certificate in his bag and a question in front of him that no training program can fully answer. What happens next is not recorded in any official document. It is happening now, or it happened recently, in the ordinary and remarkable texture of a life being rebuilt from its foundations. A phone call made, a form submitted, a morning alarm set for a reason other than a prison schedule. Or not. The uncertainty is real and it deserves to be named honestly. The Unlocking Future Connections program will continue expanding. 15 prisons, hundreds of potential participants, and industry waiting, genuinely waiting, for people with the right qualifications to fill roles that have been empty too long. The infrastructure is more real than most rehabilitation initiatives that have come before it. The private sector partners have financial skin in the game. The Scottish Prison Service has institutional credibility invested in the outcome. Justice Secretary Neil Gray has attached his name to it publicly. These are not trivial commitments. And yet, Scotland's prison population remains the highest it has ever been. The emergency early releases have not stopped. The overcrowding has not eased. The system that Unlocking Future Connections is trying to interrupt is still producing the conditions that make interruption necessary. More people are entering the system than the system was designed to hold. More people are leaving without the scaffolding they need to stay out. One training program, however well constructed, is not a justice system reform. It is a stitch in a wound that may require surgery, but stitches matter. Ask anyone who has bled long enough without one. The broader question of it, one that this documentary has been circling from its first frame, is not whether the program works. Early evidence suggests it can work. The two employment outcomes from the Inverness pilot are modest but real. The industry appetite is genuine. The broader question is whether Scotland, as a society, has decided that it wants rehabilitation to win, not as a talking point, not as a press release, not as a funded, sustained, politically protected priority that survives changes of government and shifts in public mood and the inevitable moment when a former inmate somewhere makes a headline for the wrong reason. Because that moment will come. It always comes. A program like this will eventually be connected, however tenuously, to a name in a news story. And in that moment, the question of whether rehabilitation has genuinely been chosen or merely tolerated during a quiet period will be answered. The answer will determine whether programs like this one are expanded or quietly defunded, whether men like John are given a genuine second chance or a performative one. The roads of Scotland need maintaining. That is a simple, physical, non-negotiable fact. The tarmac degrades. The signage fades. The temporary works must be set up and taken down by human hands in all weathers. The workforce to do that work is shrinking. The qualifications required are specific. The pipeline has been thinning for years. And inside 15 Scottish prisons, people are learning precisely those qualifications. Right now, the alignment is almost too neat to be believed, which is perhaps why it has taken this long to attempt. There is something in John Gilchrist's words that resists easy sentiment. He did not promise transformation. He did not speak in the language of redemption narratives that documentaries like this one are sometimes accused of manufacturing. He spoke about confidence, about hope, about not wanting to come back. Those are small words for large things. Confidence is rebuilt incrementally, in the accumulation of small competencies, cone placed correctly, an assessment passed, a supervisor who nods rather than shakes their head. Hope is not a feeling. For someone in John's position, hope is a decision made daily against considerable evidence to the contrary. Not wanting to return is not the same as being certain you want. It is simply the direction chosen, the road taken, the lane entered and committed to. The documentary camera pulls back now, past the training room, past the fluorescent corridors, past the steel gates and the stone walls, out into the gray Scottish sky, where the roads stretch in every direction. They go everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, as roads always do. Someone built them. Someone maintains them. Someone will be out there tonight, in a high-visibility jacket, making them safe for people who will never know their name. That someone might have learned the work inside a prison. That possibility is small, underfunded, imperfect, and real. Is worth more than its official framing suggests. It is worth, perhaps, exactly what it costs to build it properly. Scotland has built a road towards something. Whether it has built it far enough is the question that only time and political will, and the quiet daily choices of employers and communities and former inmates will answer. John Gilchrist is out there somewhere. The road is in front of him. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. These are real people, navigating a system that rarely makes space for their full humanity. If you found value in this documentary, please subscribe, leave a comment below, and consider watching more stories from inside the systems that shape all of our lives. The conversation does not end here. It begins.